Morning, friends.
Morning.
So in the run-up to Halloween, we're doing a scary Halloween series called It Came From the Swamp. And we've been talking about the heart, which is kind of relevant because we all have a heart. The heart that we're talking about is not the physical heart, but the invisible heart. The part of you where you feel feelings, where you experience emotions, where you think thoughts, where you lock things away that you don't want to deal with. And the reason that we've been talking about the heart is because Jesus made this amazing statement. He said, everything that you do in life, one way or another, comes out of what's inside of you. And so we looked at this verse. Jesus said, from out of the heart, come. And then he listed a bunch of nasty stuff. Evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, and so on and so forth. And when Jesus said that, what he meant is that the stuff that can make your life go wrong, the stuff that can ruin your future, the stuff that can ruin your career, your finances, your relationships, your spirituality, all of that stuff, one way or another, is already inside you, and that's where it comes from. And that being the case, we looked at one of the wisdom passages in the Bible, a bit of the Bible called the book of Proverbs, that said we need to protect our heart or guard our heart. That is, that as we learn about being persons of faith in the 21st century, it is not enough for us to monitor the way we behave. We also need to find a way of monitoring the way we actually are on the inside. So we kind of agreed together. Well, we didn't agree. I just said something and you didn't say anything. So that's an agreement. That's how it works. We kind of agreed that as we spoke about some of the issues that may or may not be going on in your life and mine, that we would do so by having the warning of Jesus and the wisdom of the Bible as a subtext. That is, be protectively careful about the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that you allow into your heart. And be protectively ruthless about the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that you give permission to remain in your heart. Because as your heart goes, so your life will be. Now, the issue that I would like to talk about this morning is jealousy. And the reason I want to talk about jealousy is twofold. First of all, jealousy is like one of the 10 commandments. So this is one of the issues that apparently God feels very strongly about. And I mention that because what often happens in a church environment is that we allow ourselves to get very, very worked up about issues that God evidently doesn't care about. And we know God doesn't care about them because they're either not in the Bible or they're barely in the Bible. And what happens is, while the church are getting very excited and worked up about issues that are either not in the Bible or are barely in the Bible, we have this nasty habit of ignoring stuff that's most definitely in the Bible and that God most explicitly cares about. And jealousy is one of those issues. God felt strongly enough about this particular issue to include it on his list of 10 things he didn't want us to do. So we need to talk about it. Fair enough? Let's have a brief reminder of what the command is. You shall not covet your neighbour's house. Now, the word covet there means to want something for your own gratification. Something that will make you feel good about you. So the instruction here from God is you shall not look at the home someone else lives in, and think to yourself, if only I could live in a home like that, I would feel better about myself. You shall not, he goes on to say, covet your neighbour's wife. Same logic. You shall not look at the relationship someone else has with someone else and think to yourself, if only I had that relationship, then maybe, finally, I'd feel better about who I am on the inside. Nor shall you look at his manservant or maidservant or ox or donkey or any of the stuff at all that belongs to your neighbour and say to yourself, if only I had what they have. If only I could live like they live. If only I could experience what they experience, then finally I would feel better about me. So that's the first reason I would like to talk about jealousy. God feels strongly about it. And the second reason, of course, is that we live today as never before, I think, in a culture in which the possessions and the achievements and the lifestyles of others are constantly paraded before our senses and are instantly accessible to us. Like some of you in church today from an older generation, were perhaps vaguely aware that Clark Gable lived better than you did. Right? He probably lived in Beverly Hills and he probably ate in fancier restaurants than you did. But that was about as far as it went. Well, today, you can click on Instagram right now, if you're bored listening to me, and look at the car Kim Kardashian drives. You can look across the street and everything everyone else has is in our face. And the net result often is that it causes us to feel dissatisfied with what we have and with how we live. And it makes us think to ourselves, if only I could get that and achieve that and attain that and live there and go there and travel in that way, then, finally, I'd feel better about me. So there you go. I think we need to talk about this, and I think actually jealousy is a difficult thing to talk about because there's something about us as adults or about us as high school students or college students that hears jealousy raised as an issue and thinks, okay, jealousy was for when I was like 5. And it made sense then because, he had a better truck that I had. His worked by remote control and I had to just go vroom vroom and I didn't like that. Or she had more Barbies than I did and I was jealous and I cried and I had a tantrum. But once we hit, I think, our teenage years, the whole idea of admitting that we feel jealous is not going to happen. And we'll admit lots of stuff. We'll admit that we get angry. We'll admit that we struggle with addiction. We'll admit that we think naughty thoughts from time to time. We'll admit that drink is an issue in our marriage. We'll admit lots of things, but we will not admit that we're jealous. It's just too embarrassing. And in the absence of such an admission, here's how jealousy surfaces, I think. There is someone in your life, and for some reason you don't like them. For some reason they make you feel uncomfortable and you're not all that sure why and you don't want to think too much about it. But if you were to poke around on the inside of you, you might discover that the reason you don't like them is because they are ahead of you in some way. They got somebody you didn't get. They achieved something you didn't achieve. They've reached a level that you have not reached. They live in a way you cannot live. And your emotional response to that is, I just don't like them. I don't feel comfortable around them but it could be the issue is jealousy, and the closer you get to them, the worse you feel about you. And that's why you hate going to your sister-in-law's house for Thanksgiving. Because it's better than the dump you live in. Right? And we say silly things in response to this. We say like, oh, I just don't like her. She's too perfect. I'm not sure that's even a thing. Or we say things, I think we've all been guilty of this from time to time. We hear about something, someone who has more than us bought or spent or did, and we say something like, well, if I had that money, I would never. Right? I would never. Here's the truth. You don't know what you'd do if you had that much. And the only way you would know what you'd do if you had that much would be to get that much. And with that attitude, you're probably not going to get that much. But it's true, isn't it? You look at people and you're critical and dismissive, and there's this sharp, cynical edge because they bought something you can't buy, they live somewhere you can't live, they go places you can't go. You make these comments, these cutting comments, and you won't admit it, not even to yourself, but they get to you. And the reason they get to you is because their place in life makes you feel bad about your place in life. And you couch it in all sorts of other terms, but it's old-fashioned jealous. They are a reflection, a dark and terrible reflection of something you are not, but would wish to be. Now, on the surface of it, you think that they are your problem. The things they have, the things they've achieved, the way they look, the dress they can fit into, the way their kids turned out. Something about them, you think, makes you feel bad about you. And on the face of it, you think they're your problem. But here's the truth. If there is something in your life that makes me feel bad about my life, you're not my problem. And the reason I know you're not my problem is because you can't solve my problem. If I'm jealous of you, there is nothing you can do to solve my jealousy. Well, there is one thing. And that one thing just demonstrates how dark all of this is. If you're jealous of someone, what's the one thing they can do to fix your jealousy? Have a disaster. Right? Am I right? Your sister-in-law, 2 weeks after telling you about her 7 Series BMW, has an accident, and it's written off. Oh, I'm so sorry. You crashed your BMW. What a tragedy. But there's some small dark part of you that's going, yes, now I feel better. Remember how bad you felt? I don't know why I'm picking on sister-in-laws. Maybe I'm tired. I can't think of anything else. You know, your sister-in-law told you that they were going on that $20,000 vacation. And you felt bad about it until you saw the photos on Instagram and there was a hint of cellulite. Yes! And that one little thing suddenly made you feel better about yourself. Oh, you lost your $250,000 a year job. I'm so sorry for you. Yes! And that's the grossness. That's the thing that comes from the swamp of what's inside of us. If you're jealous, the only thing that the person of whom you are jealous can do to fix your jealousy is to fail in some way. That is dark. And in that situation, of course, the words that come out of your mouth, because you've learned how to behave, you have a filter, are words of sympathy and sorry, but inside your heart somewhere is a little bit happy. That is sick. We all have it. Here's the thing. The people who surface jealousy within you, the people who make you feel insecure, the people who make you feel dissatisfied with your life, with who you are, with how you live, with what you have, with what you can do, those people really aren't your problem. Your problem really is God. That's your problem. You think at some level God ripped you off. Yeah, God could have given you better parents. God could have given you better looks. Makeup's only going to take you so far. God could have given you a better figure. God could have given you a better brain. He could have given you better opportunities. He could have arranged your life in a different way, but God didn't. And while we're in the habit of complaining, I suppose God could have kept your marriage from failing. God could have prevented that accident from happening. God could have prevented your kids from going off the rails. He could have prevented all sorts of stuff. But it seems when God was handing out life packages, you got a rough deal. And it's not fair. And it troubles us to discover in the Bible that God doesn't claim to be interested in fairness. Yes, in life, we would say there is some connection between hard work and success. Yes, in life, we would say there is a direct line between cause and effect. But the bottom line as persons of faith is to say that God has not distributed life evenly and fairly, and in fact the concept of unfairness is taught right throughout the Bible. For example, there's this weird story in the Old Testament about the king of Babylon, and in the story he has a severe episode of mental disfluency. He has some kind of breakdown, vague on the details, but he goes through this really rough patch in life, and at the time it must have seemed so unfair to him. He never had any peers, but none of his lessers had episodes like this in life. And yet look at this. This is the conclusion he comes to in the Bible at the end of his difficult patch. He says, God does as he pleases. Ain't that the truth? He does as he pleases with the peoples and the powers of heaven and earth. In other words, he gets to the end of this episode and he says, rather than looking around at my friends and comparing my life with everyone else's, he looks to God and he realizes that God is God. And God does stuff. And the stuff God does is the stuff God does. And it isn't fair all the time. And so we would say that when God gives to some of us good parents and bad parents, when he gives to some of us better abilities than others, it's not that God loves some more than others. It's just that that's the way the world is, it seems. And when we speak about what's fair in life and what's not fair in life, we're speaking about fairy tales. So in Jesus' day, people universally thought that getting into heaven was based on the principle of fairness. That's what everyone thought. Getting into heaven is all about what's fair. So, it would be fair for a person who's lived a moral life, a person who's never put a foot wrong, a person who was well respected by their own family and within their own community, a person who never did any of the sins written in the Bible. It would be very fair for God to take that person into heaven when they died. And it would be similarly fair for God to reject a person who's lived an immoral life, who was not respected by their own family, by their own community, who'd done most of the sins written in the Bible and some of the ones that weren't written in the Bible. You know, a person who's done all sorts of wrong things. Very fair for God to reject that person from heaven when they died. And the big reason why people didn't like Jesus during his own lifetime was because both in his behavior and in the content of his teaching, Jesus suggested that God wasn't fair. He dared to suggest that a divorced junkie had just as much chance of making it into heaven as an elder in the synagogue who never sinned his whole life. And sensing that people were unhappy about this view that Jesus had, he told the following story about fairness. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard." So, vineyards in the ancient world were notoriously hard work. Typically, they were planted on hillsides, pretty much like this one. As you can imagine, preparing those terraces was back-breaking work. Tiers had to be cut into a hill face. Those tiers had to be filled with soil. Retaining walls had to be put in place. And then once the terraces were finished, vines had to be planted. There was ongoing maintenance and so on and so forth, all very tiring. Now, most of that labour was done throughout the year by a regular workforce, by employees who were on the payroll. However, during harvest time particularly, the labour requirement always exceeded normal staff levels. So in verse 1, the man who owns this vineyard, he gets up at 5 in the morning and he heads down to the job centre to pick up some casual labour. The casual labourers who hung around the job centre early in the morning were, as you can understand, at the very bottom of the employment ladder. They were totally unskilled. They weren't good enough to find regular work. They couldn't sell themselves to employers every day of their lives. So they just hung about in the town square, hoping that someone would show up to give them something to do. Some days they'd be cleaning garbage. Some days they'd be raking leaves. Some days they'd be working in a vineyard. So the boss goes to this place and he says, "I need 10 of you guys, whatever, come." And Jesus says he agrees to pay them a denarius. Now, a denarius was a day's pay for a Roman soldier. So now we're talking government money. Right? Good wage. Good wage. So off they go, up the hill. They've found work for that day. They're happy. It's 6 in the morning. They're going to go home tonight like heroes to their families. There'll be bread on the table. So far, this is a great story. Then we read that about the 3rd hour, so this is 9 o'clock in the morning, the boss goes out and sees others standing around doing nothing. The reason they're standing around doing nothing is because they hadn't been hired earlier. I presume they weren't hired earlier because they were slightly less employable than the previously unemployable people. They were slightly higher up the useless scale. Or maybe, also a fair assumption, they hadn't bothered to show up at 6 in the morning. Maybe they stayed up last night playing PS4 or whatever number we're on now. Eating edibles and Cheerios. And they just couldn't get out of bed on time. So these are not good workers. However, he says to them, "Let's go, have a day's work." This time, notice there's no specific mention of wages, just a vague statement, "Don't worry, go work in my vineyard, I'll pay you what's right, I'll treat you fair," and off they go. Happy, I presume, to find something to do that day. Then we read, the boss goes out again at the 6th hour, so this is 12 in the afternoon. And then the 9th hour, this is 3 in the afternoon, and does the same thing. Hires people who were even more useless than the ones before, who got out of bed even later than the ones before. Gives them work, says, "I'll treat you fair, don't worry." Then we read that about the 11th hour, now the 11th hour is 5 o'clock in the Jewish day. 5 o'clock in the Jewish day is 1 hour before clocking off time. The boss goes out. He finds people still standing around and says to them, "Why have you been standing around doing nothing? No one's hired us, they answered. He says to them, go, work in my vineyard. At this point they must have said, dude, it's like 5 o'clock. You close in an hour. What do you want us to do? Just go. Do some work. Work for an hour. They say to themselves, I suppose, well, an hour's wages is better than no wages. So off they go. Maybe they'll buy a slice of bread to share with their family that night. Better than nothing. They walk up to the hillside, pick up their tools, the whistle goes, time to clock out. Next sentence. When evening came, 6 o'clock in the Jewish day, the owner of the vineyard says to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came and each received a denarius. They got a day's wages for an hour's work. So, when those who came who were hired first, they naturally expected to receive more. Fair enough. So the guys who've been working on the hillside in the baking heat since 6 in the morning, they're standing in the queue and they see these other people who showed up at 5 o'clock. They got paid a day's wages for an hour's work. So they're at the back of the queue doing the math, right? If they got a day's wages for an hour's work, we did 12 hours work. That means we're going to get 12 days' wages for a day's work. That would be fair, right? Any union reps in the church? That's fair. However, each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble. These men who were hired last only worked an hour. And you've given us the same wages as them, even though we've worked for 12 hours? You see what they're saying? Hey, this isn't fair. And are they right? Are they right?
Yes.
Yeah, they're right. I'm on their side. I was reading an article this week about industry and how to manage people and so on and so forth. And it said that one of the worst things that we can do in our workplaces is treat people fairly. Treat people the same. Everyone went quiet there. Not everyone's worth the same. Some people are worth more than others. Some people are worth less than others. I think that is right. Treat everyone the same. There's no incentive. There's no, why should I be better and faster and stronger and quicker if I'm going to get the same as the useless, slow guy who does nothing? Doesn't make any sense. Differing levels in any merit-based system, differing levels of ingenuity and industry must be given differing levels of reward. But, next sentence, moving on because it feels awkward now. He answered one of them, friend. The word friend there in first century Greek is a casual put down. This means, hey, buddy. Buddy. I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Yeah, I did, but you gave him the same money for less work. To which the boss says so. If I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you, don't I have the right to do what I want with my money? It's my money. Or are you envious because I was generous? If you don't like it, tough. Life's not fair, tough. Someone lives in a way you don't live, tough. Someone got more than you got, tough. And anyway, you don't want fair. You don't want fair. You know why you don't want fair? Because this is the GTA. And you already live better than 98% of the people in this world. You want fair, that means you having a lot less. You just want more. That's what you want. You want fair? Talk to me about a kid in Syria. Talk to me about a guy making bricks with his hands in South Africa. What Jesus meant in this wrong story is that the kingdom of God and heaven and all that isn't a meritocracy. In the Bible, we read that God saves all who come to him in faith through Christ, regardless of how they've lived, or how faithfully they've served Jesus, or for how long. And it seems unfair. At least it does, until you dig a little deeper into the logic of Christian faith and discover that if God were to give us what was fair, if God were to give us what we deserved, that might not go so good. I've read the Ten Commandments, so have you. Do you want what's fair? Do you want what you deserve? I don't. I want from God what's generous, what's forgiving, what's kind, what's merciful. And that's what I get. And it's why the Christian faith is called good news. Great news. So when I look at you and feel bad about me, the wisest thing, I think, is for me to acknowledge that my problem isn't with you, but really it's with God. And having that moment of wisdom, I need to deal with my jealousy, because it is a command of God in the Bible. I shall not be jealous. I shall never give myself the right to look at what someone else has and think to myself, if only I had that, I'd feel better about me. And is that such a command of God? Is jealousy not one of those vices, maybe the only vice, which gives you no pleasure as a kickback? Where's the pleasure in jealousy? Most of the other vices have some pleasure. Eating too much, I get it. There's a payoff. Lust, there's a payoff. Addiction, there's a payoff. Greed, there's a payoff. Jealousy, there isn't. Here's what I suggest. The thing that I think breaks the power of jealousy most effectively is to genuinely find a way of celebrating the successes of others. And to mean it. To say I'm not going to let my thoughts and my actions and how I feel about me be governed by what other people have and don't have. That is nonsense. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to celebrate the good that I see in others' lives. This is what the Bible asks of us as a church, to rejoice with those who rejoice, to mourn with those who mourn, to suffer with those who suffer, and to never, ever, ever let what's going on in someone else's life to determine how we feel about ourselves. That's nonsense. So how's your heart? How's the swamp? There was a lot of that in the news over the last few years. Every election cycle, it seems, drain the swamp. Drain the swamp. It's great talking about swamps somewhere else. Jesus would have none of that. How's your own swamp? What needs to be gotten rid of? We're out of time and I need to go and see, or stay here and see the Hunter Killer, the Gerald Butler movie. Just stay in your seats, it's cheaper that way. Here to help. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, as we think about our life, the word upon our lips and within our hearts is thank you. Thank you. You've given us so much. We are so grateful. You have been so kind, so generous. Things are not perfect for us, but in so many ways things are good. We're sorry we've been blind to the goodness. Fill us with joy today, with peace. With understanding. With eyes to see what's working and be glad, and with courage to fix what isn't. Be with us, we pray then, through Christ our Lord. Amen.